The sky that day didn't look dangerous. It was bright, calm, and strangely peaceful. People went to work, children played in parks, and nobody knew that in a few minutes, everything would end. From far above, 100 tiny lights appeared in the sky, small enough to look like stars. Nobody realized those lights weren't stars. They were weapons, and they were coming for Earth. The Galactic Council had made its decision. They had discussed for years whether humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too wild to be allowed among the stars. To them, Earth was a threat that needed to be erased before it grew too strong. So they launched their attack, believing they were doing something necessary. In their cold, perfect logic, this was not war. It was cleansing. When the first flashes appeared, most people thought it was some kind of meteor shower. Cameras came out, social feeds filled with videos. Some people smiled, some pointed and laughed. Then the sky burned white. The explosions weren't like the movies. There was no sound at first, just a silent wave of light spreading faster than thought. Cities turned to shadows. Oceans boiled. The atmosphere screamed as fire wrapped the planet. Then came the thunder, a roar so deep it didn't just shake buildings, it tore the air itself apart. Nobody ever counted how many died that day. The numbers didn't matter. The world was gone. Only a few escaped. A handful of human colonies orbiting the Moon, Mars, and a few mining stations in the asteroid belt were far enough to survive. They saw it happen, saw their home disappear in a single blinding flash. Some screamed, some fainted, and some just sat in silence, staring through glass windows at the blue planet turning red, then black. For days, nobody spoke. No radio transmissions, no commands, no rescue missions. There was nothing left to rescue. The surviving stations were small, meant for science, not for life. Food was limited, air recycling was weak, and communication lines were half broken. Humanity had become a ghost, drifting around the grave of its own planet. The Galactic Council thought that was the end. They believed humans would die quietly in the dark, forgotten, powerless, finished. They were wrong. Among the survivors, something strange began to grow. Not anger, at least not yet. It started as silence, the heavy kind that presses on the chest until you can't breathe. Then came memory. People remembered laughter, music, rain, the smell of soil after storms. They remembered home. They remembered everything they'd lost. And slowly, that silence turned into something else. Not shouting, not tears, but determination. No one said it out loud, but every human survivor felt the same thought forming inside them. We will not beg. At first, survival was all they could manage. Engineers worked without sleep to fix broken systems. Farmers on Mars tried to grow food in frozen soil. Doctors moved from one base to another, saving whoever they could with the few medicines left. People helped each other, because that was all they had left. Each other. It was strange how, in the coldest places of the solar system, humanity found warmth again. In small domes and metal corridors, they rebuilt a rhythm of life. They sang songs quietly at night, recorded old stories, taught children history. The real kind, not the kind the council wanted forgotten. Yet even as they tried to live, everyone carried that image of Earth burning. No one could escape it. Every time someone looked out a window and saw the empty space where the blue planet used to be, their heart twisted a little tighter. Then one night, deep in the mining colony of Vesta 9, an engineer made a decision that would change everything. He was repairing an old cargo ship when he noticed how much power its engine could produce if modified. He scribbled a few calculations on the wall. Then he whispered to himself, "What if we built something bigger?" He wasn't the only one thinking that way. Across the colonies, others began sketching designs in secret. Designs for ships not made for cargo or travel, but for defense, for strength, for survival. Some called it foolish. Others called it hope. They began gathering scrap metal from old satellites, melting down debris from orbital wrecks, using everything the council had left behind. The process was slow, dangerous, and hidden from everyone outside the human colonies. Every bolt tightened, every engine tested, was a quiet act of rebellion. Years passed. Children who had never seen Earth grew up hearing its stories like ancient legends. There used to be oceans, the elders said. There used to be forests. The young ones didn't always believe it, but they could see the truth in their parents' eyes, that something beautiful had been stolen from them. In the silence of space, humanity's grief became its forge. They started calling themselves the Remnant. It wasn't an official name, just something that spread naturally. The Remnant meant survivors, but also something more. A promise that the human story wasn't finished yet. Every ship built was named after what Earth had lost: courage, horizon, solace, dawn. And among those names, one word began to echo more than any other: Dreadnought. It meant a vessel that fears nothing. The first Dreadnought took nearly 10 years to build. It wasn't pretty. Its hull was uneven, its armor dented, its systems patched together from dozens of different technologies. But when its engines roared for the first time, the colonies trembled. People stepped outside their domes and stared into the darkness as blue light filled the sky. For the first time since Earth's death, humanity saw something powerful that belonged to them. They didn't celebrate with fireworks or cheers. Instead, the moment was quiet, solemn. The builders gathered in front of the ship's viewing deck, hands pressed to the glass. One of the older engineers whispered, "She flies for those who can't." That night, no one slept. More ships followed, some small, some massive, all built by hands that had once held tools for peace. Each carried the same purpose: to make sure no one would ever erase humanity again. Still, the Remnant didn't rush to strike back. They knew they couldn't fight the entire galaxy yet. They needed strength, patience, and unity. So they trained. Pilots learned to move through asteroid fields. Commanders studied alien tactics. Scientists improved weapons not to conquer, but to protect. Every lesson was earned through exhaustion and sacrifice. Even in their grief, they didn't lose their humanity. They laughed sometimes. They argued. They fell in love. They painted the walls of the ships with stars and small words like home, family, and remember. The children growing up among metal corridors didn't know the feel of wind or rain, but they carried something even stronger: the memory of what those things meant. One day, deep in the heart of the largest shipyard, a young technician discovered an old transmission recorded before Earth's destruction. It was a simple message from a woman's voice speaking to no one in particular. No matter where you are, don't stop being human. The recording spread through the colonies like wildfire. People replayed it on their personal devices, in the halls, over comms. It became almost sacred. Those words reminded everyone why they were still alive. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, had moved on. They had erased all records of humanity from their archives. In their great cities of glass and light, they spoke of peace, stability, and control. To them, humans were gone. A small, sad footnote in the long story of the galaxy, if only they knew what was coming. Far beyond their borders, in the shadowed edges of the solar system, a fleet was being born. The Dreadnoughts were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Not just ships, symbols. Each one carried pieces of old Earth within its structure: melted sand from deserts, stones from ruined cities, metal from collapsed towers. The builders said it made the ships feel alive, as if the planet itself was returning through them. When the last ship was completed, 500,000 humans stood ready across the fleet. They didn't cheer or hold parades. They simply watched as the engines of their ships glowed to life. Some cried silently, some smiled. For the first time in decades, hope had a heartbeat again. Someone from the command deck of the lead Dreadnought sent the first transmission across all frequencies. It was only 3 words: "We remember Earth." The message spread across the stars. The Galactic Council received it within hours. Most of them ignored it, thinking it was some ghost signal from old human systems. Others felt a strange chill when they heard it. The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a promise. Out there, In the darkness where the council believed no life could remain, humanity had rebuilt itself into something stronger than anyone imagined. They were no longer refugees. They were no longer victims. They were the remnant. And soon the galaxy would remember them too. The survivors drifted through the cold darkness, surrounded by silence so deep it felt alive. The stars that once looked beautiful now seemed distant and cruel. They were no longer lights of wonder. They were reminders of how alone humanity had become. Every colony and station that had survived Earth's destruction now faced the same question. What happens next? Food was running low. Machines were breaking down. And people were tired, not just in their bodies but in their hearts. The first few months were the hardest. Supplies that were meant to last a year had to stretch for 5. Water had to be recycled again and again until it tasted like metal. Many couldn't sleep. Every night through thin steel walls people could hear others crying softly, crying for the homes that no longer existed, for the families they would never see again. Yet even in that despair, something human refused to die. When the systems failed on one of the Mars colonies, workers from the asteroid belt risked their lives to send spare parts through a dangerous cargo route. When a food processor stopped working on the lunar base, miners shared their emergency rations without hesitation. No one gave orders. No one had to. They simply helped because they were human. The surviving leaders gathered through a fragile communication link, a signal that often broke mid-sentence. They spoke not as politicians but as people who had lost everything. They agreed on one simple goal: survive long enough to rebuild. The colonies became connected like never before. They shared technology, power, and ideas. The moon bases grew food using small greenhouses under protective domes. Mars developed new energy systems that used dust storms to charge batteries. The asteroid miners built massive storage units where oxygen, water, and spare materials could be stored and moved between colonies. Humanity had turned survival into teamwork. Still, the loss of Earth haunted everyone. Many found it difficult to even speak the planet's name. Some called it the Lost World. Others just referred to it as home. When people gathered for meals, someone always left an empty chair, a silent symbol for the billions who were gone. One night, a small group of children gathered near a viewing window on Mars. They looked out at the dark sky and asked one of the elders a question that made everyone pause. If Earth is gone, are we still human? The elder took a long time to answer. Finally, they said softly, as long as we remember what it means to care for each other, we'll always be human. Those words spread quietly through the colonies, like a whisper that gave people strength. Months turned into years. Humanity learned to live in the cold. They built new machines, designed new suits, and discovered ways to grow food in almost impossible conditions. Every day was a struggle, but every sunrise, even an artificial one, meant hope. Still, there was a hidden fire beneath that hope. People didn't forget what had happened. The Galactic Council's attack wasn't just destruction. It was betrayal. Humanity had trusted them. They had shared knowledge, technology, and dreams of peace. And in return, the Council had erased their world. In every workshop, in every shipyard, in every quiet conversation, people started asking the same question. Why did they do it? At first, those questions were filled with sadness. Then slowly, sadness turned into resolve. The engineers who worked in the outer colonies began collecting metal from the old satellites and wrecks that still orbited the ruins of Earth. They melted them down and stored the materials in hidden depots. They told no one outside the colonies what they were doing. Soon, small teams of scientists started appearing on different bases, carrying secret data drives and old blueprints. They studied what had been lost, not just weapons, but defense systems, propulsion engines, power cores, and designs that Earth had once hidden deep underground. They began to build, not out of anger, but out of the need to make sure this could never happen again. The first step was to survive. The second was to make sure survival had meaning. One engineer said during a quiet meeting, "If we only keep breathing but never fight for our right to live, then we're just ghosts." Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. So the colonies started working together under a new shared project, something beyond rebuilding cities or farms. They wanted to rebuild strength. Not for revenge, but for dignity. At first, they called it the SHIELD program. Its purpose was to build massive ships that could defend the colonies if another attack ever came. People didn't have much, but they gave everything they could. Spare metals, old engines, broken circuit boards. Even children helped by sorting small parts. Soon, the SHIELD program became something much greater. It wasn't just about protection anymore. It became about identity. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was preparing to rise again. Over the next few decades, the colonies transformed. The once fragile domes on Mars turned into full cities. The asteroid belts became glowing fields of construction, filled with lights and sound. The moon became the central hub of all human activity, its surface covered in silver towers and launch platforms. Everywhere, people worked without rest. They built not just machines, but dreams. Still, there were hard days. Some questioned whether humanity was walking the right path. They asked if building warships made them no different from the ones who destroyed them. But others answered with calm voices. We are not building to destroy. We are building so no one can destroy us again. That belief spread like light through darkness, and then something miraculous happened. One morning, deep in the asteroid shipyards, the first prototype of a Dreadnought engine came to life. The noise shook the metal walls. Sparks flew. Energy readings spiked so high that half the base thought the reactor would melt. Then the light steadied and a soft blue glow filled the room. The engineers stood there speechless. For the first time in human history, they had created a ship engine that could travel farther, faster, and stronger than anything the Galactic Council had ever imagined humans could build. It was a small step, but it felt like destiny. News spread instantly through every colony. When people heard that a working Dreadnought engine existed, they cried, they hugged, they laughed. Not because of power, but because of pride. For the first time since Earth's fall, they felt like humanity was no longer broken. Every surviving soul contributed. Miners risked their lives to gather rare minerals from unstable asteroids. Scientists worked days without sleep to improve the ship designs. Families volunteered to live on the new construction platforms. Even those too old to work came to tell stories or sing songs to keep the workers' spirits alive. It wasn't just a project anymore. It was a movement. Years went by, and slowly one ship became 2, then 5, then 10. Each was larger than anything humanity had ever built before. The ships weren't just machines. They were floating memorials. Inside their walls were small chambers holding artifacts from Earth, soil samples, seashells, even simple things like a violin or a child's toy. People said these ships carried the soul of Earth within them. When the first Dreadnought was completed, the entire fleet paused to witness its launch. There was no ceremony, no speeches, only silence. The ship rose slowly from the docks, light shimmering across its dark hull. Then, with a deep hum, it disappeared into the stars. At that moment, everyone knew. Humanity was no longer just surviving. It was returning. Still, the remnant didn't speak of war. Not yet. They spoke of strength, unity, and the promise that no one would ever erase them again. The Galactic Council remained unaware of all this. To them, humanity was still a lost species. They didn't know that the ashes of Earth had become the foundation of something greater. They didn't know that in the darkness, a fleet of Dreadnoughts was growing, each carrying the memory of a blue planet that once sang with life. On the outer edge of the solar system, a quiet oath was repeated among every builder, pilot and technician. We do not seek revenge. We seek respect, and we will earn it with strength. Every person who spoke those words felt something awaken inside, and something ancient, something deeply human. In the cold of space, under the light of distant stars, 500,000 survivors worked together with one shared heartbeat. They were no longer just people scattered across colonies. They were a single voice, whispering through the void. The universe had taken everything from them, but not their will to rise. And though the galaxy still slept in comfort, far from the edge of the solar system, the first signs of humanity's rebirth were glowing bright. Soon the stars would see them again. The years passed quietly, but not peacefully. The human colonies had changed. The dust-covered domes on Mars, the silent lunar bases, and the giant metal stations floating among asteroids, all of them had become parts of one great machine, the rebirth of humanity. Everywhere, people worked like their lives depended on it, because they did. Every bolt, every weld, every spark of light inside the shipyards meant survival. The Dreadnought program was no longer a secret whispered between engineers. It had become the heartbeat of the remnant. There was no single leader now. There didn't need to be one. Every person knew what had to be done. Humanity had no time for politics, no patience for pride. They had learned the cost of arrogance from the Galactic Council. The first completed dreadnought, named Resolve, floated in orbit around Mars like a silent monument. Its hull was dark silver. Its engines glowed a soft blue, and its sheer size made every person who looked at it feel small and proud at the same time. Inside its walls were thousands of crew members, scientists, engineers, pilots, and ordinary people who had trained for years to serve in whatever role was needed. When its systems first came online, the ship didn't roar. It hummed low and steady, like the sound of a distant storm waiting to be unleashed. A broadcast echoed across every colony. The first of our guardians stands ready. For Earth, for all of us. The colonies erupted in cheers. For once laughter returned, people danced in the corridors. Children drew pictures of the dreadnoughts on metal walls with pieces of charcoal. It wasn't just a ship. It was a promise that humanity's light would not fade. Soon after, other dreadnoughts began to awaken one by one. Valor, Eclipse, Horizon, Destiny, Solace. Each one took years to build, yet now it felt as if they were rising all at once, pulled by something greater than time. From the outside, they looked like floating cities, enormous, gleaming shapes that moved through the void with grace and strength. But inside, they felt alive. The crews treated their ships as living beings, giving them small touches of humanity, photographs taped to walls, hand-painted flags, tiny gardens grown from seeds saved before Earth was lost. Life inside the dreadnoughts wasn't easy. The corridors were narrow, the gravity often unstable, and the noise of machinery never stopped. People slept in small bunks, ate together in crowded halls, and worked endless shifts. Yet no one complained. They believed they were part of something far greater than themselves, something that carried the voice of every lost soul from their dead planet. One night, the stars outside the window of Horizon flickered strangely, as if reacting to the massive energy fields of the newly awakened fleet. A child on board whispered to his mother, "The stars are watching us." And for a moment, everyone wanted to believe that was true, that the universe itself was paying attention. The Galactic Council, far away in their shining cities, finally noticed strange signals coming from the human region. The readings were confusing, massive energy signatures from what should have been empty space. Scouts were sent to investigate, but none dared to go too close. The human zone had become a place of whispers, full of rumors and fear. Some council members dismissed it, saying, "They're gone. Nothing could have survived that long." Others weren't so sure. One report described artificial movements, huge ships gliding silently near asteroid belts. Another mentioned hearing a repeating signal on old human frequencies. That signal carried only 3 words: "We remember Earth." At first, the council thought it was a joke, a glitch, or a transmission echo from centuries ago. But the message kept repeating stronger each time. It was as if someone somewhere wanted the entire galaxy to hear it. Back in the colonies, the awakening of the fleet continued. Each new ship launched was met with quiet pride and solemn ceremonies. Before takeoff, the crews gathered in silence while the ship's engines powered up. They placed small pieces of earth, a rock, a leaf, or a fragment of glass, inside the ship's heart. It was a ritual, a way to carry home with them. Even though Earth was gone, its spirit traveled in those ships. Years of training had turned ordinary people into the galaxy's most disciplined pilots and strategists. They had learned everything the Council once thought humans were too emotional to master: advanced physics, tactical warfare, diplomacy, and ancient alien technologies once hidden from them. Humans had become what the Council had feared most: resilient, united, and unstoppable. Still, they didn't rush to attack. The leaders of the remnant agreed that anger alone would destroy them. They needed patience, planning, and purpose. The dreadnoughts were not created to burn the galaxy, but to protect humanity's future. Yet everyone knew, if the time came, they would not hold back. The construction of the last great dreadnought, Genesis, marked the end of the building phase. It was the largest ship ever made by human hands, powerful enough to move entire moons from orbit. Its creation united every colony, every resource, every hand that could work. When Genesis finally powered up, its engines lit up space like a sunrise. For the first time in decades, people across all the colonies stopped what they were doing just to watch. The ship symbolized everything they had lost and everything they had become. In the ship's main hall, a short message was displayed on every screen. "We are not seeking war. We are seeking respect." Those words became humanity's creed. The Galactic Council didn't see it that way. To them, the sudden rise of massive human ships looked like the beginning of rebellion. They started sending messages filled with warnings, threats, and false promises. They spoke of peace, but their fleets began moving quietly toward human territory. The humans didn't respond. Not because they were afraid, but because they didn't need to speak. The silence itself became their message. A quiet tension filled the void between the two powers. The Council's spies tried to learn more, but none ever returned. The human colonies had become invisible to outsiders, surrounded by fields of electromagnetic mist and coded defenses that confused all scanners. Meanwhile, inside the fleet, humans continued their lives. They grew food on hydro decks, celebrated small birthdays, and told stories to keep old traditions alive. Even in preparation for something as vast as war, they never forgot to live. One of the fleet's oldest engineers often told the young recruits, "Don't forget what we're fighting for. We're not fighting to destroy. We're fighting so that our children never have to live through what we did." Those words echoed across the halls of every dreadnought. After decades of silence, the remnant decided it was time to show the galaxy that humanity still existed, not with an attack, not yet, but with presence. The fleet assembled in formation beyond the orbit of Neptune, where the light of the sun barely reached. 50 dreadnoughts stood in perfect alignment, their metal bodies gleaming like silver ghosts. When their engines came alive together, the glow could be seen from the outer colonies like a second dawn. Every human who watched felt the same thing: pride, awe, and something deeper. A sense that the souls of those lost on Earth were watching too. Then came the moment that would change everything. From the command ship, a transmission was sent across every known frequency in the galaxy. It was simple, clear, and human. "To those who hear this, we are the descendants of Earth. We are not your enemies. But we are not your victims either. We remember." The signal echoed across countless star systems. Some races ignored it. Others grew afraid. But among the Galactic Council, panic began to spread. They had believed humans were gone forever. Now a fleet of living legends had returned from extinction. Council media tried to hide the truth, claiming it was just a rogue faction or ancient technology reactivated by mistake. But the people of the galaxy had seen the light of the dreadnoughts with their own eyes. They whispered about the humans, the species that had survived the impossible. Inside the fleet, the humans didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They simply carried on with quiet confidence. They had no home planet, no vast empire. Yet they had something far more powerful: unity. The Galactic Council had once said humanity's emotions made them weak. Now those emotions had forged them into something unstoppable. Out there in the darkness, the dreadnoughts waited, patient, steady, and ready. Not for conquest, but for the moment the galaxy would finally face the truth of what it had done. And deep within the heart of the lead ship, a small flame burned, not from engines or weapons, but from memory. It was the memory of Earth, still glowing in the hearts of those who refused to forget. The galaxy had destroyed a planet, but not its people. Humanity had returned, silent, watchful, and stronger than ever. The great silence that followed the counterattack was heavier than any sound. Across the shattered remains of what was once Earth's orbit, human fleets drifted, scarred, weary, but alive. For the first time in generations, humanity had taken back control of its own fate. Yet deep in the command halls of the dreadnoughts, no one celebrated. There was no cheer, no victory chant, only a shared stillness that came from loss too deep to count. One officer stood near the massive observation window, staring at the faint blue glow of Earth's remains. What had once been oceans now shimmered like frozen glass, and the land below looked more like an ancient scar than a home. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everyone aboard knew what had been taken from them and what had to come next. In the darkness of space, thousands of human ships moved like silent shadows, regrouping under one unified command. They no longer called themselves a military. They called themselves the Last Fleet. It wasn't about nations anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about making sure no other world, human or alien, would ever suffer what they had. The Council's broadcast still echoed across the channels. A cold, robotic voice had declared Earth a necessary sacrifice for galactic balance. Those words were burned into every survivor's mind. It wasn't just an act of war. It was a declaration that humans didn't deserve to exist. And that belief had united them stronger than any government ever had. Far away, in the heart of the Council's territory, the alien empires were in chaos. The attack on Earth had been meant to send a message of control, but it had done the opposite. Reports were spreading of human fleets moving through uncharted systems, striking with precision, and then vanishing into darkness. They didn't destroy cities or colonies. They destroyed weapon platforms, command hubs, and supply lines. They fought with cold, calculated discipline. Rumors whispered through the galaxy that humans had built something beyond understanding. Machines that moved through hyperspace like phantoms, powered by the grief of a lost world. The Dreadnoughts had become a symbol of unstoppable resolve. Alien admirals who once laughed at human technology now avoided human sectors altogether. They feared the quiet ones, the survivors who didn't speak, didn't threaten, but simply acted. Inside one of the Dreadnoughts, deep in the control core, the captains gathered. Holographic maps floated around them, showing the entire galactic span. Their next move wasn't about retaliation, it was about survival. The Council wasn't just an enemy, it was a system that needed to be dismantled, piece by piece, before it could rebuild and strike again. "We strike their communication grid first," one of the tacticians said quietly. "Without that, they're blind. Then their defense networks. No civilian harm. Only their weapons." The others nodded in silence. None of them sought blood. They sought balance, the kind that had been denied them when their home burned. The operations began in secret. Human engineers who had once worked on satellites and colony ships now built tools of survival from wreckage. They scavenged, adapted, and created devices that could bend light, confuse scanners, and mask entire fleets. Every dreadnought became a moving planet of its own, self-sustaining, hidden, and intelligent. As weeks turned into months, the human presence in the galaxy became more than rumor. Refugees from other planets began reaching out to them, pleading for help. Many species had suffered under the same council that had judged humanity. Slowly, alliances began to form, not through politics but through pain. The humans didn't trust easily, but they listened. They gave aid to those who had been silenced. They shared food, medicine, and hope. One alien commander from a world half destroyed by the Council's cleansing wars spoke through trembling lips. "You humans, you lost everything. Why help us?" A human officer answered simply, "Because we know what it's like to be left with nothing." That sentence traveled faster than light. Across the stars it became a whisper of courage. The humans, once condemned as reckless, primitive, dangerous, had become something else entirely. A force of justice in a galaxy that had forgotten compassion. Back on the command bridge of the leading dreadnought, the crew prepared for the next phase. Their sensors showed the main council station orbiting a massive gas giant, a structure built from metal, harvested from countless conquered worlds. The humans didn't plan to destroy it outright. Instead, they wanted to make the council see the truth. They would take control of it, broadcast everything the council had done, and expose the lies that had justified Earth's destruction. The night before the mission, there was no sleep. Many of them sat quietly, looking at old photos, worn trinkets, and messages from loved ones they'd never see again. The silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. Every heartbeat, every memory carried purpose. When the fleet moved, it did so like a storm hidden inside still air. The ships jumped through hyperspace corridors that only they knew how to navigate. Their engines left no trace, their signals unreadable. As they approached the Council's capital system, the stars around them seemed to flicker as if holding their breath. Inside the command deck, the officer who had once watched Earth's ashes now stood tall. "No mercy this time," he said quietly, not with anger, but with resolve. "No mercy for those who called death justice." The first strike began not with explosions, but with silence. Human ships infiltrated the outer network, cutting power and communications in seconds. Then the Dreadnoughts arrived, surrounding the Council's station like colossal shadows. The aliens inside panicked, scrambling for defenses that no longer worked. The humans didn't fire a single shot. They broadcast one simple message across every frequency in the galaxy. "We are humanity. We are what you tried to erase. You destroyed our home, but not our will. This ends now, not with your death, but with your truth." Then the Council's records were released. Every order, every lie, every hidden war. Billions across the galaxy watched in disbelief as the so-called guardians of peace were exposed as tyrants. Worlds that had obeyed them for centuries now turned away. Fleets defected, leaders resigned, and the balance of power began to crumble. For the first time, humanity had not just survived, they had changed the course of the galaxy. Yet even as the Council fell, the humans didn't celebrate. They knew the journey wasn't over. The galaxy was vast, and peace wasn't something won with weapons. It had to be built, patiently, painfully, and together. As the Dreadnoughts drifted through the stars once more, their lights glowed softly against the darkness. They carried, with them, the last spark of a world long gone, and the promise that even in the coldest void, humanity's heart still burned bright. The galaxy had changed, but peace was still far away. The Council's fall had left a huge power gap, and old rivalries were waking up again. Many races were scared, not sure who would lead now. They had always lived under the shadow of the Council, following orders even when they didn't agree. Now, with that control gone, there was only silence, confusion, and fear. The humans, however, were not looking for control. They only wanted a world where no one could decide another's fate with a button or a bomb. The Dreadnoughts drifted through the stars like giant protectors, keeping watch but never invading. Wherever chaos began to rise, they appeared not with violence but with reason. It was strange to see humans, once labeled as reckless and emotional, becoming the voice of calm in a storm. Inside the lead Dreadnought, things were quiet but focused. The humans had started something new, a gathering they called the Circle of Free Worlds. Every planet or colony that had suffered under the Council was invited to join. The goal was simple: to rebuild together as equals. Delegates from dozens of worlds came to speak. Some had scales, some had fur, some shimmered like living crystal. Yet when they sat in that great round hall, there was something human in all of them, the wish to live without fear. The humans listened more than they spoke. They knew that leading through force had only ever caused pain. Still, not everyone trusted them. Whispers ran through the halls. Humans have the strongest fleet now. What if they become the next Council? Those words reached the human commanders too, and they understood. Fear was a heavy shadow, and it would take time for others to see that this time humanity's power came from loss, not ambition. Meanwhile, across the void, small groups of the old Council's loyalists had survived. They hid in deep sectors, gathering strength, spreading lies. They said that humans had manipulated the fall of the Council for their own gain. They painted them as monsters, whispering that the destruction of Earth had been faked to win sympathy. These lies began to grow roots in places where fear still ruled. One day, a transmission reached the Dreadnought fleet. It was from a distant mining colony, a human settlement on the edge of unknown space. The voice trembled with panic. "We've been attacked. Not by aliens, but by something wearing our own technology. They call themselves the True Council. They say they'll restore order. They're hunting us." Everyone in the control room froze. The officer in command clenched his jaw. It wasn't over. The darkness that had burned Earth was still alive, hiding under new names. Within hours, the fleet was mobilized. They didn't attack blindly. They searched, traced signals, followed the trail. The more they found, the clearer it became. The remnants of the Council had stolen human designs and built copies of Dreadnought tech. They were spreading terror again, burning colonies, silencing those who resisted. This time, humanity wasn't just defending itself. They were defending hope itself. As the fleet reached the edge of the mining colony system, they saw the enemy ships. Cold, dark, and silent, each one marked with the Council's old emblem. For a moment, it was like looking into the past. At the same force that had once rained fire upon their home, the Dreadnoughts didn't rush. They formed a calm line, massive and silent, facing the imposters across the blackness of space. Then a voice was transmitted to all frequencies. It was calm, human, and filled with quiet strength. This galaxy has bled enough. Lay down your weapons. The age of fear is over. The enemy ships didn't answer with words, they fired. Streams of energy lit up the void. The Dreadnoughts' shields flared, shaking but holding firm. Then, one by one, the human ships responded. Not with rage, but precision. They targeted engines, not lives. They disabled instead of destroying. The fight was fierce but controlled. Every move showing the difference between vengeance and justice. When it was over, the fake council ships floated powerless. The humans sent boarding teams not to punish, but to rescue. Many of the enemy soldiers were young, misled by lies. They didn't even know what the real council had done to Earth. In the aftermath, a strange thing happened. The people across the galaxy who had doubted humanity saw what they stood for now. They saw that power didn't have to mean cruelty, and that even those who had lost everything could still choose mercy. Days later, during a meeting of the Circle of Free Worlds, the hall was filled with light. A message was read aloud, signed by dozens of leaders from distant planets. They wanted to join hands with humanity, not under them but beside them. For the first time, the galaxy wasn't ruled by fear or control but by shared choice. The humans didn't smile much. They knew the road ahead was still long. There were still ruins to rebuild, memories to face, and people to heal. Yet something inside them had changed. The pain that once fueled their anger now gave them strength to protect. On the Dreadnought bridge, one of the engineers looked out at the stars and spoke softly. When they destroyed Earth, they thought they ended us. But maybe they only woke us up. Those words spread quietly among the crew. They weren't spoken like a slogan, they were felt like truth. Humanity had learned to survive not through dominance but through unity. Every dreadnought carried a small piece of Earth inside it, soil, air, water, so the people could still breathe and remember where they came from. Over time, small green patches began to grow on every ship, tiny gardens under glass domes. Children played there, laughter echoing through the metal halls. It wasn't Earth, but it was life, and that was enough. In distant systems, alien children began to hear human stories, the story of a blue planet destroyed, and a people who refused to let hate define them. These stories became lessons, songs, and symbols of courage. Still, deep in the dark corners of the universe, whispers of new threats lingered. The fall of one empire often created room for another, yet this time the galaxy wasn't alone. There were guardians now, humans and allies who remembered what silence after war truly sounded like. As the Dreadnought fleet continued its watch, their lights shimmered softly against the stars. They no longer represented revenge. They represented survival, memory, and hope, and in the endless black sea of space, that hope shone brighter than any weapon ever could. The story of Earth's destruction had started as a tragedy. Now it was becoming a legend, a reminder that even when a world burns, the spirit of its people can light up a galaxy. Years had passed since Earth's ashes drifted through space. Yet the memory of that blue world still lived in every heartbeat of the survivors. Humanity had rebuilt, not on one planet but among the stars. Their home now was made of metal and light, scattered across many worlds. The Dreadnoughts, once built for war, had become symbols of peace and guardianship. Wherever they went, they carried stories, lessons, and hope. In those years, the galaxy had changed in ways no one expected. The Circle of Free Worlds had grown stronger. Dozens of species, once enemies, now worked together to build something new, a council of trust, not control. There were still disagreements, still small conflicts, but nothing like before. Fear no longer ruled. The sound of destruction had been replaced by voices planning the future. On one of the largest dreadnoughts, a new generation of humans was growing up. They had never seen Earth, yet they spoke about it like a place from an old dream. Their teachers told them how blue the oceans were, how sunlight felt on real skin, and how grass moved with the wind. They studied not to fight but to understand. They learned the mistakes of the past, the pride, the silence, the blindness that had allowed the council to rise. These children were born from loss, but they were raised with purpose. One day the fleet received a message from a faraway system, one long abandoned after the council wars. It was a strange signal, repeating over and over, carrying ancient human code. The officers gathered around as it played, filled with static and whispers. Then, after a long pause, a faint human voice spoke. "If anyone hears this, this is the Aurora colony. We survived." The room went silent. The Aurora colony had been one of the last human outposts before Earth was destroyed. Everyone had believed it was gone, wiped away with the rest. Yet here it was, alive. Without hesitation, the fleet set course. For weeks they traveled through dark, forgotten regions of space. Old navigation charts were useless. These routes hadn't been traveled for decades. When they finally arrived, what they saw made their hearts tremble. Aurora still stood. The planet's surface was scarred but alive. Cities built into cliffs, glowing with soft lights, shimmered through the haze of its atmosphere. When the Dreadnoughts entered orbit, thousands of small crafts rose to greet them, and on every screen faces appeared, human faces, old and young, filled with disbelief and joy. "We thought we were alone," the voice said again, this time stronger. "We thought the rest of humanity was gone." Tears filled eyes across the control rooms. For so long, the survivors had carried the pain of losing everyone, of believing they were the last. Now that emptiness began to heal. Humanity had not just survived, it had multiplied, adapted, hidden, and endured. The reunion was overwhelming. The Aurora survivors spoke of how they had escaped before the attack, how they had built underground shelters waiting for a day when they could rise again. They had rebuilt their lives from almost nothing. And now, seeing the Dreadnoughts, the giants of the lost Earth, was like seeing ghosts of history arrive to set them free. The fleet stayed for months, helping the colony reconnect with the galaxy. Engineers restored old systems, scientists shared knowledge, and children from both sides laughed together under artificial skies. The humans of Aurora were different, more grounded, more in touch with nature, but their hearts carried the same flame. During this time, something unexpected happened. The leaders of the Circle of Free Worlds came together for a meeting on Aurora. It was the first time the entire alliance met in person. The humans offered the planet as a new home for the Council, a neutral ground where all species could speak freely, far from politics and power. The idea was met with agreement. It was fitting that the planet that had once been forgotten would now become the heart of a new beginning. The new council was named the Accord of Light, representing the shared promise to never repeat the past. As the new government formed, humanity quietly stepped back. They didn't claim leadership or control. They simply guided, advised, and reminded everyone of the cost of arrogance. Their dreadnoughts became symbols of balance, always watching the skies but never interfering unless truly needed. Years turned into decades. The galaxy entered a golden era of peace. Trade routes opened, lost colonies were found, and science flourished. Planets once burned by war now glowed with cities and life again. The dreadnoughts, though still powerful, became places of learning, floating academies, museums, and sanctuaries. One of them, the oldest of all, carried inside it something precious, a small vault of Earth's memories. Inside were seeds, music, art, and recordings from before the war. Every year people came to visit to see what once was and what inspired it all. The children often asked, "Will we ever have an Earth again?" The elders always smiled softly. "Maybe not the same one," they said, "but wherever we build together with love and courage, that's Earth too." Slowly, the dream began to grow. Humanity and its allies started working on a new project, a planet that could be their shared home. Terraforming ships began shaping a barren world, planting air, oceans, and forests. Every race contributed something: minerals, technology, and knowledge. It was no longer just humanity's dream, it belonged to everyone. When the first trees began to grow, people wept. It wasn't just about rebuilding a planet, it was about healing a wound that had burned for centuries. The galaxy watched as life bloomed again, not from dominance, but from unity. In the quiet that followed, one of the oldest commanders of the Dreadnoughts walked through the observation deck, watching that new world spin below. His hair was gray now, his voice softer, but his eyes carried the same fire they did when Earth fell. He whispered, "We lost our home once, but maybe this time we'll learn to protect it, not with fear, but with wisdom." Behind him, children's laughter echoed through the ship's halls. The next generation was already preparing to take over, full of curiosity and hope. They weren't raised on stories of war, but of rebuilding. They didn't see aliens as enemies, but as neighbors. And somewhere deep in the ship, in a quiet memorial room, A small blue hologram of Earth still shone. People came to stand before it, not to mourn, but to remember where everything began. The galaxy outside sparkled brighter now, as if the stars themselves approved. The humans had turned pain into strength and strength into peace. They had become not conquerors but guardians of balance. The council that once ruled through fear was now only a name in history books, a warning of what happens when power forgets empathy. In that final calm, the humans looked to the stars with quiet pride. They had walked through fire, carried their dead through silence, and still chosen kindness. Their journey wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about legacy. Somewhere in the darkness of deep space, an old satellite still drifted, the last remnant of Earth's early days. Its message kept repeating just as it had centuries ago. This is Earth, we are here. We reach for the stars. And now, after everything, those words were finally true again. The humans had reached for the stars, not as wanderers, but as keepers of peace, proof that even after total destruction, the human heart could still find light. The Dreadnoughts sailed onward through the endless night, their lights glowing softly, carrying the spirit of a lost world that refused to die. And so, the story of Earth did not end with its fall. It lived on in every hand that chose compassion, in every world that dared to begin again.